Hello, hello, hello. So good. They said hello thrice. In the alchemical tradition of thought, Hermes and Mercury, amusing themselves over lunch on a rainy day, rather than going for a swim into eternity, the churning sea. Well, what I wanted to do was try a Bibliomancy reading today. What is Bibliomancy? Bibliomancy is where you use a book to give you a synchronistic reading of the moment you're in, a sort of mirrored Jungian interpretation of reality, the seeking of the mind that wants to be struck by lightning and illumination for where they might be on their hero's journey. Now, obviously, people love to do tarot card readings, and it seems a very profitable way of setting up a small business on YouTube, but it really doesn't interest me to endlessly extract dubious entertainment from the astral realm for one's amusement or profit. I'm much more drawn to my favorite piece of technology, the analog book, which used to be a living thing from the natural world. A very underrated piece of technology, I feel. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 10 books here, do a brief random reading of maybe a paragraph or a page, and you will choose one of these books. What I will do is just offer you the title and the author and have a look at the cover, and using one's intuition and one's own sense of psychic magnetism, just make a choice. After you've made a choice, I'll give a little introduction about the book and then seek a synchronistic reading. I find, even looking at some of my old videos, it's extraordinary some information is present that is not immediately obvious. I feel everything contains like a field of information that we're always interacting with, that's operating on a conscious, subconscious and unconscious level. So for those of us who are seeking to awaken from this dream, we look for the signs, symbols and auguries that are like little games of hide and seek with the divine. People often talk about their tarot card readings being delivered by spirit. I'm never quite sure whose spirit that is. Is it Jesus, Satan, Nigerian prince? Never quite sure. But the intention of this is to connect into that field of information that represents the collective unconscious, a field that is like a dynamic, invisible force that interacts with us in mimetic resonance, if that makes any sense to you. So we have 10 books. I'll put a link below to timestamp each book. And the idea is you would just choose one book from this reading, and if you want, you could come back at a later date and pick a second book. Now, of course, there's nothing stopping you just watching the entire video through from beginning to end, and you might find some of the books interesting, whatever, but you won't get a synchronistic reading unless you intentionally and actively and consciously make an intuitive choice of what attracts you the most in this moment. And if anybody's wondering, as I use my little Grateful Dead tabletop bandana, if you're wondering why I haven't put up any Grateful Dead vinyl online, particularly with Bob Weir passing through this realm, I just haven't been in the mood to listen to any of that music at the moment. It feels more like something for the spring or summer. So those are the basic rules. I have a mix of fiction, non-fiction, biography. So let's just see. Let's just, just go on your instinct. Don't overthink it. Pick one book and come back at a later date if you want another reading, because the information remains there. The thing about a book is it represents an analog container of information, which gives a kind of quasi-immortality to the intellect of a human being. Funny thing, the only way we have of really passing on our ideas from one generation to another, and as everything becomes digitized, that information then can be continually changed and edited. So there's a great pleasure in old books. I'll give a little introduction about each book afterwards, but I don't want to distract you with that now. So let's just go book by book. Okay, book number 1, Cider with Rosie, Laurie Lee, by Laurie Lee. That's option number 1. Option number 2, God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. Option number 3, The Moon's a Balloon by David Niven. Option number 4, A Creed for the Third Millennium by Colleen, McCullough. Option number 5, I think, The Big Screen, The Story of the Movies and What They Did to Us by David Thomson. Option number 6, The Dedalus Occult Reader, The Garden of Hermetic Dreams, edited by Gary Lachman. This is option number 7, Be As You Are, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi. Option number 8, The Process by Brion, Gysin. Option number 9, The Finding of the Third Eye by Vera, Stanley, Alder. And option number 10, Thanosis by Gysin Reza Georgiani. So those are the options, and the books I have chosen are all piling up here beside me unread. Most of these I haven't read before or have dipped into, and I think 10 is a good number to choose from, because as I said, you can come back to this video at different times if you have something in mind or just curious. So we will begin with Cider with Rosie by Laurie Lee, option number 1. Okay, this is one of these nice original Penguin paperbacks. 3 and 6 was the price before decimalization. Don't ask me how much that would be today. The idea was, you'd have a cheap paperback that you could buy on your train journey. Wouldn't be that more, I suppose, the price of a couple of newspapers or something like that, or the price of a sandwich or something. So it could be socially acceptable in the early 60s to sit on your train reading Lady Chatterley's Lover. I saw a number of these old Penguin paperbacks at like an antiques fair. I bought this one, and I had this as well, which is sort of the sequel, as I walked out one midsummer morning. But I think one of these is enough. A lot of people in Britain would probably know this, as I think it was made into like a TV show or a TV movie or something about life in a Cotswold village. His sort of story of his childhood growing up at that time that he saw disappearing into history. Okay, what can Laurie Lee tell us? My first image of my mother was of a beautiful woman, strong, boundless, but with a gravity of breeding that was always visible beneath her nervous chatter. She became in a few years both bent and worn, her healthy opulence quickly gnawed away by her later trials and hungers. It is in this second stage that I remember her best, for in this stage she remained the longest. I can see her prowling about the kitchen, dipping a rusk into a cup of tea, with hair loose tangled and shedding pins, clothes shapelessly humped around her, eyes peering sharply at some revelation of the light, crying ah or oh or there, talking of Tonks or reciting Tennyson and demanding my understanding. With her love of finery, her unmade beds, her litters of unfinished scrapbooks, her taboos, superstitions, and prudishness, her remarkable dignity, her pity for the persecuted, her awe of the gentry, and her detailed knowledge of the family trees of all the royal houses of Europe, she was a disorganized mass of unreconciled denials, a servant girl born to silk. Yet in spite of all this, she fed our oafish wits with steady, imperceptible shocks of beauty. Though she tortured our patience and exhausted our nerves, she was all the time building up around us, by the unconscious revelations of our loves, an interpretation of man and the natural world so unpretentious and easy that we never recognize it then, yet so true that we never forgot it. Option 2, God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert. Now this book, I have to admit, I did read many years ago, but I didn't have any copies, physical copies of the Dune books. And I saw this in a local shop, and you have to really appreciate these kind of sci-fi covers, these paintings you got on those books of the 60s, 70s. It's just very physically nice to hold that, £2.50, and with the dreaded barcode, of course, telling you of its era. Okay, Frank Herbert, what can you tell us in this moment? Leto prepared with patient care for his first private meeting with Siona since her childhood banishment to the fish speaker schools in the festival city. He told Moneo that he would see her at the little citadel a vantage tower he had built in the central Sarir. The site had been chosen to provide views of old and new and places between. There were no roads to the little citadel. Visitors arrived by thopter. Leto went down there as though by magic. With his own hands, in the early days of his ascendancy, Leto had used an Ixian machine to dig a secret tunnel under the Sarir to his tower, doing all the work himself. In those days, a few wild sandworms still roamed the desert. He had lined his tunnel with massive walls of fused silica and had embedded countless bubbles of warm, repelling water in the outer layers. The tunnel anticipated his maximum growth and the requirements of a royal cart, which at that time had been only a figment of his visions. In the early pre-dawn hours of the day assigned to Siona, Leto descended to the crypt and gave orders to his guard that he was not to be disturbed by anyone. His cart sped him down one of the crypt's dark spokes, where he opened a hidden portal. Emerging in less than an hour at the little citadel, one of his delights was to go out alone onto the sand. No cart, only his pre-worm body to carry him. The sand felt luxuriously sensuous against him. The heat of his passage through the dunes in the day's first light sent up a wake of steam which required him to keep moving. He brought himself to a stop only when he found a relatively dry pocket about 5 kilometers out. He lay there at the centre of an uncomfortable dampness from the trace dew, his body just outside the long shadow of the tower which stretched eastward across the dunes. From a distance, the 3,000 metres of the tower could be seen as an impossible needle stabbing the sky. Only the inspired blend of Leto's commands and Ixian imagination made the structure conceivable. 150 metres in diameter, the tower sat on a foundation which plunged as deeply under the sand as it climbed above. The magic of plasteel and superlight alloys kept it insupple in the wind and resistant to sandblast abrasions. Leto enjoyed the place so much that he rationed his visits, making up a long list of personal rules which had to be met. The rules added up to the great necessity. Okay, Book 3, The Moon's a Balloon by David Niven, the classic bestseller, £1.75. Now, David Niven is one of those people, famous British actor, had a Hollywood career, but it was of a generation where he took part in World War II as well, and lived the kind of life that we can't really imagine nowadays. This is from 1982, first published 1971. Yeah, I've seen some great films. I saw this in another little second-hand shop and thought I must read it. It's funny that it sold 4 million copies, and you wonder how many people know who David Niven is nowadays. But let's ask him for his considerations in this moment. Harry Bouquet, a frustrated man, was in a hurry. Christ, he said, I've got 6 of these goddamn things to get through by lunchtime. What are you going to do? Mr. Golding said, you'd give me something easy. I said, Jesus, nothing's easy in this business. Okay, stand over by that table while they light you. The set was decorated as a New York apartment. Under the bright lights, I could vaguely make out the outlines of the camera and about 40 people. A man with evil-smelling fingers stuck a light meter immediately beneath my nose. Light 'em all, came a voice from the camera. Okay, Harry, let's go. Bouquet loomed out of the shadows. Okay now, start off facing the camera, then turn slowly when I tell you. Wait a beat at each profile, then wind up facing the camera again. Got it? Yes, sir. Turn him over. I stood blinded by the lights and stared in the direction of the camera like a dog watching a snake. Turn slowly, said Bouquet. Hold the profile, goddammit. Okay, now, hold the full face. Try to come alive, for Christ's sake. Tell us a funny story. Out of my panic and my subconscious came a very old schoolboy limerick. I recited it. There once was an old man of Leeds who swallowed a packet of seeds. Great tufts of grass shot out of his arse and his cock was covered in weeds. Cut! Bouquet loomed up again. What are you trying to do, for Christ's sake? Get me fired? Everyone sees these things. Ella, Mayer, Mannix, the whole bunch. He softened and smiled. Okay, kid, now relax. We'll pick it up from there. Think of some little story when you're ready. Tell me and we'll shoot it. Clean it up though, will you? Finally, I recounted the story that had happened to Tommy Phipps when he first went into an automat. Not knowing how it worked, he put 5 cents in the slot machine for a cup of coffee and collected a jet of hot fluid in the fly buttons. Later, somebody ate a sandwich and somebody else dunked their donut in the coffee he had finally managed to collect in a cup. I had laughed when Tommy told it, and there was, I thought, quite a gratifying reaction when I had finished this homely little tale. The next day, Goulden called me and told me to meet him at his office. That test was really pretty bad, apart from the natural bit when you told the limerick. Except for that, you were all frozen up. You won't get the part this time. LB wants Louis Hayward anyway. But I think you can make it, and I'm going to help you. I'll be through at my picture in about 12 weeks. Till that's over, I can do nothing. Call me in 3 months, and we'll see what can be done. Okay, book 4. Are you recording? Okay. Book 4, Colleen McCullough, A Creed for the Third Millennium, a novel by the author of the Thorn Birds. I have a vague recollection that was some TV series. I never watched it. I came across some reference to this book because she was predicting the world being, the world's climate changing into a new ice age, and wrote this book, I think, in the early, was it 1995? So I thought, that sounds interesting. And apparently, she lived with her husband on Norfolk Island in the South Pacific, almost as if she expected things to change. So, Colleen, actually open on this. Did somebody mark this? Chapter 9. Well, it meant something to the prior owner anyway. On the night of Friday, October 29th, 2032, Dr. Joshua Christian became famous. God and Cursing, a new approach to millennial neurosis, sold out its enormous first printing within a month and continued to sell at the rate of 100,000 copies per day. Everyone everywhere clutched the white volume with the red lettering and the silver bolt of lightning across its front, and everyone everywhere was actually reading it. By overwhelming popular demand, the Bob Smith show on which Dr. Christian originally appeared was rebroadcast a week later after a huge advertising campaign, and the whole nation watched. This time, the show's usual sponsors were accommodated in 3 long commercial breaks. One at the very beginning of the show, one between Dr. Christian's solo speech and the question and answer period, and the last at the end of the show. Though Tonight had not lost revenue on its first broadcast, Environment picked up the tab, and soon that gaunt, sunken face with the piercing dark eyes could be seen on the cover of every magazine and periodical. It was stamped on the t-shirts, and its first edition as a poster with the single word believe printed beneath it sold out in a day. Dr. Moshe Chasson had managed to evade his colleagues on the night Dr. Christian appeared with Bob Smith, but he knew he had only postponed the inevitable confrontation. So when he came into work the following Monday and found 2 notes on his secretary's desk, he sighed, scratched his head, and invited Dr. Abraham and Dr. Hemingway down for morning coffee. "Did you watch Tonight last Friday, Moshi?" demanded Dr. Abraham before his bottom was into a chair. "As a matter of fact, I did," said Dr. Gysin. "Judith sent me a message that I'd find it interesting." "Oh," cried Dr. Hemingway. "Judith knew, did she?" It gave Dr. Gysin enormous pleasure to lean back in his chair and imitate Dr. Carriol at her most supercilious. He tried to drive his brows into his hairline and drawled, "My dear Millie, when have you ever caught our esteemed chief napping?" That stymied both of them, since it was unanswerable. "Actually," Dr. Gysin went on, in his tone indicating that he thought he should take pity on them, "she's a great friend of the publisher at Atticus, and they've got Dr. Christian under contract. I believe Atticus used Judith as one of the first readers of Dr. Christian's book, while it was still in manuscript. So last Friday's Tonight Show was no surprise to you, huh?" asked Dr. Abraham, still sceptical. "None at all. Then why didn't you warn us?" asked Dr. Hemingway. Dr. Gysin grinned wickedly. "I couldn't resist not warning you. What surprises me most is that you didn't see him when he was here in Environment earlier this year." They both sat up. "Here?" bleated Dr. Abraham. "That's right. After Judith read his book, she invited him down to talk with me about relocation. That took the wind completely out of their sails. They stared at Dr. Gysin with the expressions of 2 children discovering far too late that they had missed out on a treat. Okay, book 5 is The Big Screen, The Story of the Movies and What They Did to Us by David Thomson. Now this book I picked up really cheap because it was in one of those shops that sell all those, remainder books. So you can always get those popular books, a year or 2 later after they're published, because they always publish far more of these books than they sell, and then they get pulped. So this is sort of a history of the film industry. And is there anything that can illuminate us in the present moment? When the film was released, Powell cried out proudly, "You can't tell we're not there." Perhaps in 1947 the eye was deceived. If you look at the same film today, you know it is fake, but it's the artifice that is most appealing. Nowadays we always know we're not there. The neurotic urge persists in filmmaking to have it fool the eye, but the eye has become more numb and less confident. Who can forget the theatrical aplomb of Lars von Trier putting the city of Dogville on a marked-up stage with a diorama sky behind it? Wasn't the folding up of the whole blocks of Paris in Christopher Nolan's Inception a landmark in surrealism's dream? Inception is a rare kind of picture nowadays. It's filled with technology and emotion. It cost about $160 million and it grossed over $800 million. It won several Oscars for craft work and was nominated for Best Picture, though not for Nolan's direction. In those areas it lost to The King's Speech by Tom Hooper, which cost $15 million and grossed about $138 million. The King's Speech was a pleasant picture about an ordinary king dealing with a small personal problem. It was entertainingly acted and expertly dressed, and it had the veneer of an independent picture that carried reassurance and no threat. It could have been made in 1937 to 38, and so anyone fond of the movies of that moment took heart and comfort. Inception, on the other hand, wanted to introduce marvels we had not seen before in the service of a brand new, half wry yet disturbing portrait of the mind at work, awake, in dreams, or approaching death with dread and desire. It was an attempt at a mainstream movie, but it was drawn to neurology and dream, and one day it will loom over the King's Speech as much as Kiss Me Deadly now seems modern and poisonous, while Marty is hard to sit through. Of course, actually I'll read a little bit more. Of course, this is esoterica now. Not even the secure place of film and the universities can persuade us that these differences of opinion matter. This may be the place to admit and apologize for the people and films omitted or shortchanged in this book. Michael Haneke, Kieslowski, Satyajit Ray, Abbas Kiarostami, Chen Cage, Zhang Yimou, Wong Kar-wai, Andrei Tarkovsky, Alexander Sokurov, Madonna, and so many others. On the other hand, I made space for Moy Bridge, I Love Lucy, television as a whole, the money and the deals, pornography and video games, the cell phone, streaming, and all things that make up the shapes on our screens. This is a history of a larger process than cinema is everything. And it is a book about worrying over a general impact of moving imagery and are becoming more removed from or helpless about reality. Just wanted to see what the book he was referring to on the Michael Powell film was. Black Narcissus, which is a fascinating film that you should watch if you have the temperament for the flotsam and jetsam of the 20th century. So we're on to book number 6. The Dedalus Occult Reader, The Garden of Hermetic Dreams by Gary Lachman. Gary Lachman, famous for playing with Blondie and then writing dozens of occult books and biographies, which I've read quite a few of. And this is a library book, apparently, from County Cork. And I think this was taken out prior to the Sniffles and should probably be returned to them. Okay. Well, Dedalus, do you have any illumination for us this afternoon? Just let's see what this extract is from before I read it. A Victim of Hyperspace by Algernon Blackwood, who was being observed, and by an observer as keen and trained as himself, an inkling of the true state of the case began to dawn upon him, and he was on the verge of entering. Indeed, his hand already touched the doorknob, when his eye, still glued to the spy-hole, detected a slight movement. Directly opposite between him and the fireplace, something stirred. He watched very attentively and made certain that he was not mistaken. An object on the mantelpiece, it was a blue vase, disappeared from view. It passed out of sight together with the portion of the marble mantelpiece on which it rested. Next, that part of the fire and grate and brass fender immediately below it vanished entirely, as though a slice had been taken clean out of them. Dr. Silence then understood that something between him and these objects was slowly coming into being, something that concealed them and obstructed his vision by inserting itself in the line of sight between them and himself. He quietly awaited further results before going in. First he saw a thin, perpendicular line tracing itself from just above the height of the clock and continuing downwards till it reached the woolly fire mat. This line grew wider, broadened, grew solid. It was no shadow. It was something substantial. It defined itself more and more. Then suddenly at the top of the line and about on a level with the face of the clock, he saw a small luminous disc gazing steadily at him. It was a human eye looking straight into his own, pressed there against the spy hole, and it was bright with intelligence. Dr. Silence held his breath for a moment and stared back at it. Then, like something moving out of a deep shadow into light, he saw the figure of a man come sliding sideways into view, a whitish face following the eye and the perpendicular line he had first observed broadening out and developing into the complete figure of a human being. It was the patient he had apparently been standing there in front of the fire all the time. A second eye had followed the first, and both of them stared steadily at the spy hole, sharply concentrated, yet with a twinkle of humour and amusement that made it impossible for the doctor to maintain his position any longer. So this is book 7. I do feel I'm gradually becoming enlightened in the tradition of the fourth way by excessively working. Oh yeah, Be As You Are, the teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi. Again, I came across a reference to this somewhere and I don't remember what. He's one of these Indian gurus from the 20th century. I think from the early to mid 20th century. And he would give all these talks. People would come to see him. And it was his followers who then started writing down all his sayings. Because what people like this realize is that you can commit, or rather you can transmit light codes in direct interaction from person to person. But some people can't process something so simple as such a simple path to the awakening of the higher mind and true heart. So they want to know things intellectually, and this book, I suppose, is for this kind of the Western mind to come into contact with these ideas, which are, I suppose, based in non-duality. Okay, what can you tell us? Oh, I opened it on a bookmark because I've been flicking through this, but I haven't sat down and read it. Question. When I do this and cling to myself, that is, the I thought, other thoughts come and go, but I say to myself, who am I? And there is no answer forthcoming. To be in this condition is the practice. Is it so? This is a mistake that people often make. What happens when you make a serious quest for the self is that the I thought disappears and something else from the depths takes hold of you. And that is not the I which commenced the quest. What is the something else? That is the real self, the import of I. It is not the ego, it is the supreme being itself. But you have often said that one must reject other thoughts when one begins the quest, but the thoughts are endless. If one thought is rejected, another comes, and there seems to be no end at all. I do not say that you must go on rejecting thoughts. Cling to yourself, that is, to the I thought. When your interest keeps you to that single idea, other thoughts will automatically get rejected and they will vanish. And so rejection of thoughts is not necessary. No, it may be necessary for a time or for some. You fancy that there is no end if one goes on rejecting every thought and when it rises. It is not true. There is an end. If you are vigilant and make a stern effort to reject every thought when it rises, you will soon find that you are going deeper and deeper into your own inner self. At that level, it is not necessary to make an effort to reject thoughts. Then, it is possible to be without effort, without strain. Not only that, it is impossible for you to make an effort beyond a certain extent. I want to be further enlightened. Should I try to make no effort at all? Here it is impossible for you to be without effort. When you go deeper, it is impossible for you to make any effort. If the mind becomes introverted through inquiry into the source of aham vritti, the vasanas become extinct. The light of the self falls on the vasanas and produces the phenomena of reflection we call the mind. Thus, when the vasanas become extinct, the mind also disappears, being absorbed into the light of the one reality, the heart. See, I told you so. Okay, where are we up to? 8. I think this is book 8. The Process. Yes, still recording. The Process, a novel by Brion Gysin. Now, Brion Gysin, I came across when I was fascinated researching all the beatnik writers, such as Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, William Burroughs, etc. And Brion Gysin lived in Morocco, and I think he ran a restaurant and was involved with the master musicians of Jujuka, and was there when the Rolling Stones visited Morocco in the 60s, and Brian Jones recorded this album. Let's see, The Pipes of Pan. It's really an album you should have on vinyl. So I think it was released on Rolling Stone Records in 1971, and I bought this CD. This to me is like the ultimate hash album. I mean, basically Brian Jones recorded them as like a field recording, and then sort of half the album is as recorded, and then the other half of the album has all this sort of echo and delay added onto the tapes in a very trippy, trance-inducing state. And it's the only album to get released under Brion Jones's name. He also did a film soundtrack, but that never got a proper separate release. So that's just an interesting association. I've been to Morocco myself, but this book was Brion Gysin's experiment. He was very influential on William Burroughs' work, and they had some kind of relationship, and they got into developing, dream machines, technology that would flicker in the eye to produce different states of consciousness. And this is his sort of like psychedelic odyssey through North Africa. And I bought this book years ago, and in my youth, as a mercurial kind of character, I was always wanting to share information with people. So of course I gave it as a loan to someone, and of course they never gave it back. And then I go online, and I'm regularly shocked at how books like this go in and out of print, and now would cost like €100 or something to buy. But I managed to track this down for around, I think it was around 15-20 euros. So I immediately grabbed it, and at some point we'll sit down and read it. But it's so long since I've read this, I don't remember that much. Yeah, and he pioneered the cut up with Burroughs. So let us see what this curious character from the 20th century might tell us about today. Labas. Let's check this. Labas had a genius for enraging Arabs, which a former French governor-general might have envied. The sneer with Labas was a scimitar, which he had whittled all Arabs down to what he considered their proper elevation, grass high. He reserved the other side of his blade to shave Americans, all rich Americans, north, central and south. I've made quite a study of Dr. Labas. We've got a huge Labas archive down in Malamut, which I hope you'll have a chance to consult when you get down to Cape Noon. It's all in audio, so you can have it played to you while you're asleep, if you like. We have all the equipment. Amos, it turns out, is an electronic genius amongst other talents, and he's seen to the wiring of Malamut under Maya's direction. Although, like most women, she really hates sound unless she makes it herself. The house, as you'll see when you see it, is meant to amplify her. Maya built it with Pio while I was away on my stumbling spiritual quest, so you'll hear the story of Malamut better from her lips. Maya still thinks Labas was a cross between Talleyrand and Machiavelli with a dash of the Borgias thrown in. It was that last dash she found irresistible. Her greatest childhood experience had been being poisoned by mushrooms out on the Canadian prairies. So when she got to college, that took her into toxology and eventually genetic biochemistry before she married poor PP and got interested in money. As an old Moroccan hand himself, the first story Labas ever told her was about some mysterious substance which Moroccan women are said to give their husbands to make them complacent. You must have heard it, of course. Borbor, it's called. You see, when Maya and Pipi first moved from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to Basel, it had been with the idea of studying with the Professor Forbach. You know, the man who discovered the hallucinatory principle of all the new drugs. Actually, in the end, Forbach threw Maya out of his laboratory when he learned that she had launched a mutual fund scheme from Basel. You've heard of fundamental funds, haven't you? Well, that's Maya's baby, or was in those days, when Professor Forbach dismissed her because he could no longer consider a seriously dedicated scientist. If she insisted on making millions or hundreds of millions of dollars like that on the side, so she offered to buy him out from his pharmaceutical combine, which paid him only some annuity. But that was a mistake, waving her dollars around. Professor Forbach was furious, naturally. She called him a kept chemist and swept out to the sounds of breaking glass test tubes, slamming the door. Maya was running a North African fever that first night with Labas, and it must have been a wild, something like the mating of a basilic and a griffin. Afterwards, she's always sworn to me that it was by pure feminine intuition that she dug Pio for a poisoner. But of course, it had been in all the papers when it happened. She still swears she hadn't read a thing about it and didn't even know who he was when he got into bed with her. When I tried to tell her, she snapped at me. That's just the type of nasty tale people in Tanja are forever telling about each other. And besides, I never even heard of Lindissima Ruther either until last night. I'd been foolish enough to advise her to watch out because everyone, including Amos Africanus, lost no time in telling me how Dr. Labas had spent 10 months in jail in Barcelona, accused of poisoning her or trying to poison Lindissima's adopted son for her. I have to add a little editorial in here when he mentions mysterious substance which Moroccan women are said to give their husbands. I have a memory of sitting down in one of those little sandstone buildings with some Moroccan men that when you go in, you're then greeted by all the non-iconography of their geometric designed decorations, and them trying to sell me these herbs that would make all women controllable by me, and then trying to get me to buy some enormous amount of something that would be entirely illegal to bring through an airport. Okay, we're up to book 9, The Finding of the Third Eye. Now, I previously did a reading from this, but I haven't finished reading this, so I thought maybe I'd include it. And the reason I originally bought this, I came across some strange reference to it and wanted to read it because people talked about it being, something very out of date and politically incorrect view of, spirituality, metaphysics, and the New Age. So I thought, well, I better read that, because this was first published in 1938, and it's always very useful to go back prior to World War II for those politically incorrect views of humanity, spirituality, religion, and human nature, men, women, etc., etc. So is there anything that could still illuminate us in this time travel we will embark upon? A much-needed spring clean, which they are always anxious and willing to do if given the chance. A great many people are perturbed by the question as whether or not to eat meat. An authority stated in the newspaper recently that the consumption of meat is falling rapidly, and that the choice seems to be whether to return to meat eating and the strong warlike nature of our forefathers, or give it up and become more peaceable and gentle, as the whole world is crying out for peace and brotherliness. The latter course would certainly seem to be the more desirable. No idealist or advanced person really likes the idea of eating meat. Many believe that it is a barbarism which will gradually disappear with the passing of the Dark Age. It is quite possible to be strong and active, as many are, on a meatless diet, but after half a lifetime of meat eating, many systems may find a temporary difficulty in readjustment. Here again, crankishness must be avoided. Meat may gradually be relinquished until there is a sound knowledge of the necessary substitutes, such as nuts and cheese. But apart from any question of principle, most people would improve in health and measure as they gave up all flesh foods. The question of alcohol and smoking naturally arises at this point. There again, it must be an individual concern for each person. Alcohol is an artificial stimulant and a poison. Its action, if taken in any quantity, is to drive the ego partly out of the body. The ego can only use the body when it is of a certain temperature. Extreme cold forces the ego out, and unconsciousness ensues. Overheating has the same effect, resulting in fainting or the delirium of fever. Constant driving out of the ego through alcoholism loosens its grip upon the body and allows outside entities or influences to gain admittance, with the various and dire results such as obsessions and deliriums, while the victim is still partly conscious of the lower astral world. Alas, those snakes and rats are not imagination. No self-respecting and earnest person will care to indulge unduly in any stimulant drug, sedative, such as smoking, excitement, or emotionalism, which prevents him from being entirely himself and the captain of his own soul. Nevertheless, a sudden, violent, reactionary effort towards complete absentation in any of these matters may, of course, an equally overbalancing effect upon the individual. Common sense, moderation, and a love of the natural joys of living will keep the situation under control. For instance, discrimination between raw spirits and delicate wines is a case in point. Hand in hand with the question of diet comes the problem of exercise, as we continue to argue on Reddit into infinity about what to eat. Personally, I would say meat's okay in moderation, and alcohol is a bad idea. Okay, book number 10 is Thanosis by Gysin Riza Georgiani, who is a curious character from the 21st century who pops up on interviews on podcasts with strange views about aliens, UFOs, Gnosticism, life after death, and such like. And this was his book, and hopefully, Gysin, you don't mind me reading a little extract. So what can you tell us this afternoon? A single universal mind actually negates what is supposed to survive bodily death, namely a personal identity with an intentionality and agency that can be ascribed to itself. William James, both in his guise as a philosopher and as a psychical researcher, saw this over a century ago. McCullough adopts James' filter conception of consciousness, but while claiming to share James' radical empiricism, seems oblivious of James' arguments for why preserving any degree of free will and responsible agency requires rejecting monistic idealism in favor of pan-psychic pluralism. Kastrup's ontology, as McCullough summarizes it, asserts that reality is mind-like. Matter is a particular experiential modality we call perception. Personal consciousness exists within mentality at large. This monistic idealism effectively dissolves the individual into a ripple on the surface of a singular universal mind, what Kastrup repeatedly likens to disassociated alters within the greater field of consciousness, similar to the phenomena observed in dissociative identity disorder. McCullough claims that this provides a metaphysical scaffold upon which to situate the anomalous data of terminal lucidity, near-death experience, mediumship, and reincarnation. He believes that it explains the mind's apparent independence from the body by inverting the causal direction so that the brain is the extrinsic appearance of inner mental processes rather than the generator of consciousness. But this maneuver, as superficially seductive as it may be, comes at a grave philosophical cost: enough free will for personal agency. If each of us is merely an alter of a universal mind, then there is no real boundary between me and you, no authentic self-identity that survives death, except as a reassociation with the totality from which the ego had been disassociated. The metaphysical implication is not survival, but submersion, not the individuation of soul, but its absorption into the all-pervasive mentation of the cosmos. McCullough, drawing from Kastrup, affirms metaphysical idealism not as a tentative hypothesis, but as the most coherent worldview available, one that collapses the mind-matter dualism, absorbs the hard problem of consciousness, and renders post-mortem survival an expected feature of universal mentation. He invokes Max Planck, Carl Jung, and even hyperspace theories to argue that we are each a part, or rather a facet, of the living consciousness of the universe. As I have argued in more than one of my books and essays, freedom is incompatible with metaphysical closure. Any system that posits a logically necessary universal order, whether in the form of physical determinism or monistic idealism, ultimately negates the authentic creativity of the individual will. If all of reality is but the self-unfolding dream of a universal consciousness, then the self and its personal agency are illusory. McCullough and Kastrup, by positing a single disassociating mind behind all appearances of individuality, transform every person into a puppet of a universal psyche. Our individuality and personal agency would be as illusory as that of the characters who appear in our dreams. And what is worse are the metaphysical implications of the awakening of the universal consciousness.